Perfect. All right, I appreciate everyone coming out today. For today's session, we're going to be going over what is ransomware, how it's used in different attack vectors, and how you can protect yourself against it. So, you guys have any questions throughout the session? Just ping me or Courtney inside the channel or chat for Zoom. We'll do our best to answer your questions. Without further ado, let's get started. So as with every session, I have to go over like who I am in case we have new members or new subscribers that are joining. So my name is Kenneth Ellington. I'm the founder and CEO of Ellington Cyber Academy. I have about 4 to 5 years of cybersecurity experience. And I'm currently a senior consultant at a Big Four accounting firm, specializing in SIM and SOAR technologies, which is what we specialize here at UCA. I've been a blue team instructor for Black and cybersecurity since college, basically. And I'm a huge My Hero Academia fan. I'm looking forward to season 7 coming up this year. So again, how to protect yourself against ransomware. That's what we'll be talking about today. So agenda, what is ransomware? How can you protect yourself against it, and developing a disaster recovery plan for your firm. The last portion is especially important. So let's go over a quick overview of how you can do that. Because when the stuff hits the fan, right, we want you guys to be prepared for it. Because it's very bad to not have, let's say, a plan for when a hurricane hits, and then a hurricane hits, and then your house is flooded and you don't know what to do. So being prepared ahead of time is super important. That's what we'll be talking about with that. So what is ransomware, right? Ransomware is a type of malware that locks a victim's device or systems until that said person pays the malicious actors a certain amount of ransom, normally in a cryptocurrency, right? Because it's hard to be traced. So there's different types of ransomware. Think of leakware, dogsware, mobile ransomware, wiper-destructive ransomware, and scareware. So leakware is where, or dogsware is normally where a malicious actor will download the malware inside of your system, normally like a malicious link, and then they'll try to leak off your data towards their external server. So they may try to steal company secrets, right? Internal client data, things of that nature, right? And they may sell it on a black market unless you pay them a certain fee. Mobile ransomware attacks normally involves locking your device, right? So your actual mobile device, right? Until again, you pay off a certain ransom for the attackers. Wiper-destructive ransomware is a type of ransomware that's normally designed to destroy your systems, right? Delete all your data, corrupt your files, make sure you can't ever use your systems again, unless you again pay off that certain amount, right? Then scareware is basically where the attacker try to scare you to paying a ransom, right? Saying, hey, if you don't pay us this amount, we'll delete your systems or we'll do something malicious towards you, release some secrets, release some pictures within a certain time period. So the end goal for all of these attacks is to basically get money out of your pocket into their pockets. So these are a couple of ways that they're done. You may have seen some attacks in the news, like the attack on my city of Dallas, right? Where they were shutting down some of the first responder systems. So they're making it harder for them to actually do their jobs, right? That's kind of scary, right? So I know the city of Dallas has still been trying to fix all their systems, right? Get things back up and running. So again, it's super prevalent. This happens every day in our country and around the world. So knowing what this is and how to protect yourself is incredibly important. Any questions so far? No?
I have a question. Well, just for anyone who's not familiar of what ransomware would be. On a typical daily basis, how would you, like as a SOC analyst or as an security engineer, how would you go upon whether if it's preventing from a company, like say for yourself, you work at EY, it's a huge company. How do you go upon with preventing ransomware? Whether if that is doing tabletop exercises or anything in that such, can you actually run that down a bit?
Yeah, so we'll be talking about some prevention mechanisms in a little bit later. But just a quick overview. My opinion, the best thing is user awareness training, right? Because I would say over 90% of the attacks will come through like a phishing link or some type of social engineering attack, right? That's how most attacks happen, a lot of the cases, either that or like insider threat. So having great user awareness is super important, right? Because users are normally probably the most vulnerable link, right? Because they're human beings. So if they're not trained properly or they don't have an interest in it, it's not easier to get them to click on that link or open up the attachment, pick up the USB drive, and then you can get compromised, right? That's probably the biggest thing you can do to protect yourself is have proper user awareness training. Make it interesting, make it relevant, so they actually pay attention during it, right? They're not on their phones during that time. If you're able to do that, I think that goes a long way to you being successful in your company.
I definitely agree.
Perfect. So how does ransomware affect the system? These are a couple of ways that system gets infected, right? As I've mentioned before, a phishing or social engineering attack. So somebody tries to manipulate a user to get a desired behavior out of them, right? So again, this may be, they may send you an email, right? And if you're busy during your day, you don't pay attention towards it and you click on something, then they may have to infect your system, right? And that's how their attack vectors begin. So that may be one way. Another way may be they may try to corrupt your operating system or software vulnerabilities, right? So if you don't patch certain software, right, when the recommended patches come out and it's out of date, then most attackers can use that route to exploit your systems as well. I've been credential theft, right? Stealing someone's credentials, right? Like credentialing, harvesting, for example. All right, so getting someone's username or password, and then being able to log in, pretending to be them. So it's gonna be kind of hard to detect. That's why having a UBA system or user behavioral entity analytics, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is super important. There's a bunch of tools that do it. A lot of the SIM platforms have that integrated natively, which it basically is where it gets a baseline of user behaviors, and then it lets you know when something deviates away from that. So if Courtney, let me logs in from Maryland from 8 to 5 in the afternoon, and she does these certain activities on her system, right? And then next week, she's logging in from Toronto, Canada, and she's logging in from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. She's doing a bunch of weird activity that's normally not subscribed towards her, right? She may try to be getting elevated privileges, for example. That may be something that may not be something that she should be doing, right? A UBA system would actually detect on that and it would send off an alert, or it would just directly block her from doing that activity. So there's a couple of things, or a couple of ways that your systems may be trying to get compromised using ransomware. So always be on the lookout for it. Again, number one would be probably the biggest thing I would say is how you might get compromised with ransomware or get on your system. That's why even best case scenario, it may happen to you, right? Because attackers are all trying to get inside your system, right? So they can gain access and then try to hold you hostage, basically. So having a plan is super important, which we'll be getting to in a little bit later.
I can definitely attest to the first one specifically, especially because dealing with phishing emails. As far as on the job that I work with, we work within the SOC as phishing team members. And you see a lot of times, you have different attack vectors, whether it's credential harvesting, spoofing, as well as particular type of attack vectors, say for some that malicious actors are wanting to do to be able to compromise the system. So like Kenneth has said, making sure that security awareness, having the proper security training is definitely important. Knowing your ins and outs based on like basic security fundamentals is also important. And utilizing OSINT tools. If anyone who's not familiar with OSINT tools, it's open source internet intelligence. So dealing with specific tools that will be able to help to identify whether if it's IP addresses, domains, usernames are all useful as far as working within the SOC.
Very well said, Courtney. And for my day job, I don't normally have to deal with ransomware, or if that goes down, that's not normally my responsibility as a consultant specializing in SIEM and SOAR technologies. If I was like an incident responder, that may be a different case, right? So all just depends on what type of role you have. But it would ultimately would affect me, right? I might be brought in just to try to give my advice or advisory on how to solve it or help out. So it just depends. So these are some of the ways and protection measures and response steps that you can do in case you are hit with ransomware, right? So some of the measures that you can take would be maintaining backups, right? So in case they do delete all your systems wipe and they wipe your system because you want to pay the ransom, right? Having backups is super important. So make sure those are up to date, right? If you don't update your backups and then your system's wiped, and then your CISO's like, all right, guys, well, let's get this back up and running, right? Let's update or let's get our backups. And then you're like, well, sir, we haven't updated in 8 months. That's gonna be an issue, right? A lot of times you might be fired for it if you're unprepared, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
So that's very important, right? It's one thing to have a plan and a piece of paper, make sure you're able to actually execute it, right? Then applying patches regularly, right? It's something we talked about a couple minutes ago. When your patches are supposed to come out at your scheduled time, normally for enterprise stuff, you wait like a couple of weeks to make sure they don't jack up your systems, but do it in a timely manner. It's super important. I know for a lot of, I'll say end users, we don't like doing updates because it's super annoying, right? We're on our computers, it says update now. You're like, I'll do it a week later. And then 2 months happen and then you still haven't updated, right? So when those updates come, try to do it quickly as possible because those are super important, right? They'll patch different vulnerabilities and flaws inside the systems that can protect you from attacks like these. Then having the proper cybersecurity tools is another important thing, right? So I would say my personal opinion, most firms have too many cybersecurity tools, and then they don't know what half of them do, right? It's kind of like they get a new budget and they see new Bentley and they want to buy it, even though they have 10 inside the driveways, right? So don't do that. Make sure every tool, every platform you have makes sense. Your team's able to actually use it and it serves a certain use case or purpose that you're trying to solve. So again, I specialize in SIEM SOAR technologies. Those go hand in hand together. So having tools such as that, vulnerability scanners, right? What's the other one? Endpoint technologies. So think of EDRs, XDRs, right? Or endpoint detection and response or extended endpoint detection and response with the alphabet soup. But just having like an overall plan is super important. To know what tool sets you need to have for your organization, what maturity or what security maturity posture you guys are at, right? Because you guys may be at a lower level if you're a smaller company. If you're like a major company such as Apple, Google, then you may have a better idea as to what you need to do. So you get confused and need help, normally try to hire someone if you don't have an internal team for that. So hire consultants, hire MSSP providers to try to get you up and running. And then employee cybersecurity training is probably the biggest thing. That's why it's highlighted in red. So all the above, honestly, don't really matter if your employees don't know what they're doing or know what not to click or have any decent understanding of cybersecurity as it relates to personal security and corporate security that they need to do. Right? Because I can build like the biggest fortress in the world, but the doors left wide open and it doesn't really matter, right? So making sure your employees have a baseline understanding of social engineering and how it can happen towards them is super important. I think it's incredibly necessary, but most firms do it pretty crappily, honestly. Just giving your employees like a bunch of videos to watch isn't going to be enough, honestly, right? Because they may not want to do it, right? So being able to actually build a proper program is going to be incredibly important. That's one thing to be on the lookout for. And again, that's something that we do. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. And then the last slide before we take questions is creating a disaster recovery plan. So the main goals of disaster recovery plan, when shit hits the fan, to make sure you're actually prepared for it, right? So you're not drowning. So think of it like if there's a fire inside the building, you're able to actually like operate and know what to do when the fire hits, right? Because when the fire hits, that's not the time to actually start building a plan out, right? Because everything's burning down. So being able to build a proper plan is super important, right? So the main goals are to get your business up and running, or to make sure it runs smoothly during that trying time, right? So there's a ransomware attack, right? That's the topic of today's call. When the ransomware is hitting, right, it's super important to make sure your business is able to stay up and running. Because let's say you're Amazon and your service gets shut down and no one's able to use Amazon Prime or your site or buy anything, that's normally billions of dollars you're going to be losing per day, right? Which is incredibly hurtful towards your company's bottom line. And we don't want that to happen, right? Next thing would be protecting sensitive data. So think of internal client data or customer data, right? A lot of times ransomware actors will try to target this, right? Try to exfiltrate this inside of your firm. So being able to protect this is pertinent. One, for your company for protection, two, for legal reasons, right? Because the customer data gets stolen, there's normally legal ramifications that have to be brought against you because of that, right? That's another thing to keep a lookout for. And then ransomware is super deadly and shuts down your systems, right? How quickly can you get your systems back up and running towards your normal operations, right? So I go back to doing the backups, right? Having those plans, right? To make sure you're able to get back up and running as quickly as possible, so you guys can start to make, I guess, in a lot of cases, money again. Any questions over that part so far?
Yeah, we have actually Danny in the chat. Probably mentioned a little bit earlier for some of the other slides, but I had mentioned that strong segmented offline backups are just as important as well, and definitely agree. As far as making sure that your system is constantly being updated with different versions, if you're on a Windows system, you have Windows 10, Windows 11, or if you're on a Linux system, dealing with a MacBook or so, just making sure that your systems are constantly going through updates, so that just in case, say for example, disaster happens, earthquake, natural disaster, or if a ransomware attack did appear, you have at least the important documentations, whether if it's client data or if it's sensitive data to the company, is all backed up on the system.
Yeah, having those offsites are super important. So normally how firms do it is they'll have some type of offsite backup that's at least like 100 miles away from their main location. So in case there is a flood or national disaster and their headquarters or local area, they're able to actually pull the backups from that offsite location. Because if I built a backup server farm like 2 miles away from my main server farm and we get nuked, right? There's a war or something, then all our data is gone and destroyed. I mean, granted, if there's a nuclear war, I'm probably not going to care about my servers anymore, but all right, just saying that you don't want to, yeah, you don't want to put it right next to each other in case something happens, right? If there's a flood, earthquake, fire, national disasters, whatever the case may be. So normally, I think it's like 100 miles. They try to put it at a minimum. Normally, it's in like complete different region, right? Would have different national disasters, so they don't overlap. So if you have servers like in New York City, right, or the New York City area, you may put servers for your backup in like Texas or Dallas or something like that, right? Because there's a large distance, right? And then the national disasters and issues that you may face in New York City are different from Dallas, right? So it gives you coverage. And so how to actually develop a plan for this? First step is to choose a plan owner. So the reason it's important is when stuff is happening, you need somebody to kind of blame, quote unquote, joking, not joking, when stuff happens, right? So plan owner will be the person in charge of updating and maintaining the actual disaster recovery plan. So something goes wrong and they're not able to find it, or it's not updated properly, that's on them, right? That's a part of their role and they understand that. Then identifying critical risks or critical assets. So know what is valuable towards your firm, what attackers want to get, right? And what you can't lose if your systems or your area, service, whatever gets destroyed. So every firm may be different, right? So some firms may have a lot of internal secret data that they may not want to get rid of. So think of government facilities, think of proprietary technologies or healthcare companies. And then the next thing might be client data, right? So think of hospitals, right? They don't want to give that data out towards people, right? Medical data is super important and super valuable. So that may be one thing that that may be critical assets towards you, right? Every firm is different to know what your critical assets are and how to protect them. Then determine the risk, right? So what is the likelihood that this is actually going to happen, right? How likely is it that someone's going to actually steal this data, right? How well protected is it? And are you comfortable with that acceptable risk? If it is, then you're good to go. If not, then you may have to fix some of your issues. The last thing is to practice and test. So this is going back towards the tabletop exercises Courtney was talking about. The tabletop exercise is basically kind of like a mock trial run where you pretend that an incident has happened inside your organization and now you're trying to respond towards it. The reason this is done a lot is to prepare yourself when an actual incident does happen, right? You're able to actually prepared for it. Because if you write everything on a piece of paper, like, all right, guys, this is awesome, this looks good. And then you never practice it, and 3 years later it happens. You're starting to freak out, right? You're like, what the hell is going on? I don't know what to do, right? Because you never really practice it, right? Same thing with like basketball players and football players too, right? They have like live practices and live drills. They're trying to make it as realistic as possible towards game day. So same thing for us, right? We're trying to make it as realistic as possible for whenever the attack comes, right? So that's super important to practice and continue to test out your environment, see what your flaws are, see your weaknesses are, and see how you can actually protect against it. Any questions at all about any of these topics?
Just as far as anyone who has a question regarding to just watching the videos, or even for anyone who will be watching these videos in the future. As far as a timeline of implementing a disaster recovery plan within a business, how often do you suggest this?
Implement the disaster recovery plan. So normally when you start the business, or when a business gets decently sized, you're supposed to have a disaster recovery plan. And normally the minimum is every year. You're supposed to take a look at it to make sure it's up to date. Depending on what your acceptable risk level is, may want to update it every quarter or biannually, right? Just depends on how big your organization is, what you guys do, and what you're trying to accomplish. But at a minimum every year.
Makes sense.
Because right, as your company grows or shrinks or changes, your needs and your risks, your assets may change. So you want to update those. Supposed to, though. Most firms don't do that, honestly. This is where we run into issues. But that was it, though. Does anybody have any other questions?
Danny, do you have any questions as far as anything that we have went over? Anything about any curiosity towards the topics that we spoke over? Any questions that pertain to some of your learning that you may have, or as well as what Ellington Cyber Academy also offers? And of course, the last slide, we have our information here.
No real questions. I also do a lot of work with SIM, so that'd be interesting to just talk more about that another time. But yeah, thank you for putting this together.
Of course. Thank you for actually joining. I know that Kenneth had went over a few questions. I kind of posed some questions to ask to Kenneth. When it comes down to ransomware, and just learning how implementing a SIM into the environment. Here at Ellington Cyber Academy, why do you feel as though it's important to learn a SIM for students to be able to learn this background knowledge?
So for most large organizations, I would say Fortune 100 firms or Fortune 500 firms, almost all of them have SIMs installed inside their system, right? In some type, way, shape, or form, or fashion. And the cool thing about a SIM, which I thought was super cool when I first started, was that basically all the data from the firm gets run through that, right, to be logged and monitored. You're able to see a lot of what's going on inside the environment. Excuse me. So that's why it's super important, in my opinion, because it does log and monitor basically the majority of your logs. Some of them may be stored offsite or like an S3 buckets, for example, but it normally routes through the SIM first. So being able to detect and monitor and build rules to be able to watch out for different malicious activities to get a start on it is super important. That's why I say I think everyone should at least learn or understand what a SIM does, right? All the different logs that you'll see speeds up your learning process for learning cybersecurity and IT. All different types of log, for example, like compliance, endpoints. So think of different platforms such as CrowdStrike, Microsoft, Azure, AWS. All those logs, a lot of times will get logged directly into the SIM platform. So you're able to actually see what they look like and how they work. So that's why I think it's super important to learn.
I definitely agree, especially when you touch. I was literally about to touch point on endpoint, especially CrowdStrike. The position that I have, we're constantly looking at different users, whether if it's dealing with hashes, dealing with specific websites, and trying to figure out, okay, say for example, if a user had clicked on a specific phishing email and you wanted to decide who it was, where the IP address comes from, having that knowledge of the SIM definitely transpires into, learning how endpoints work, and you get to see how everything is broken down. And, oftentimes when we're not very familiar of how SIMs work or endpoints work, having this basic knowledge of all of the capabilities of what it can actually do definitely helps. It saves time, it saves effort, and then it's the biggest thing is it completes the job. It gets the job done.
Any other questions or concerns, anybody? If not, that's all we have for you today. The next session will probably be more student interviews. So student interviews and some of our hiring managers will start to interview them. So be on the lookout for that. I appreciate you guys coming out, and I'll see you next time.
See you all. Take care.